What's up, fellas? Today's video is an interesting one. We're going to be talking about GOAT/NBA ranking debates and the big issue with them, because this is something that people ask me about all the time, right? Twitter, live streams, comments. People ask me all the time what my opinions are on this player compared to this player all time, or who's the GOAT, or whatever the case may be. And I don't really have those conversations often, but we're going to have them in today's video. But quickly, before we get started, if you're new here, what's up? My name is Tucker. I upload NBA content twice a day, every day on this channel. So if that's something you're looking for, then be sure to subscribe. That's a great place for consistent NBA content, as I said. You can leave a like rating on the video as well if you're enjoying the content. It really helps me out a ton. It doesn't take too long. It helps get the video out to more people on YouTube, and I would really appreciate it. And if you're interested in hanging out with me outside of these videos, there's a link to every single one of my socials and a link tree down in the description below. With those things said, let's go ahead and start. So here's the biggest thing that I would say about all-time rankings, about greatest all-time debates, whatever the case may be. If that's your thing, right? It's never really been my thing. I don't think I've ever made any kind of all-time ranking, any kind of GOAT video. Maybe I will at some point. I'm just not wildly interested by them because it's taking something that is a very subjective matter, right? And trying to make it fully objective. And there are certainly cases you can make, you know, in very severe circumstances where it's like, oh, this player was wildly better. How could you have them ranked above? You can have those conversations. But here's my problem, right? And we'll expand on this throughout the video. I'm sure many of you guys have had conversations with friends or people on the internet, whatever the case may be, about who they think the GOAT is or where someone has someone else ranked, right? Have you ever, you guys tell me, have you ever had one of those conversations with somebody and at the end of it, someone has changed their mind? Someone comes into the conversation and they're thinking, you know what? I think that Tim Duncan is a greater all-time player than Kobe Bryant, and here's the reasons why. And you're on the other side, and you say, well, no, Kobe is doing this and Kobe's doing that. Has anyone ever had one of those conversations and the other person or yourself have changed their opinions by the time the quote-unquote debate is over? That's my issue. And you can expand this to many conversations outside of basketball. But everybody goes into these debates, whatever the case may be, and is only ever trying to convince the other person that they're right. There's no conversation being had. There's no, well, I see your point here and I understand what you're saying there. It's just, okay, I'm going to, throw my facts at you. You're going to throw your facts at me, and nobody's ever actually going to listen to each other. That, for me, is the biggest issue. And I understand that there's a place for that, right? I mean, there's stuff all the time that I talk about on this channel that I'm like, this is what's happening, this is my opinion, and I ask for you guys' input all the time, but I'm still just, throwing stuff at you that I think. But that's why, for the most part, I stay away from rankings and greatest of all time debates. It's because nobody ever really changes their mind. Nobody ever really comes out of the conversation and thinks, you know what, those are really good points. Maybe I should, reevaluate what I'm looking at. And to expand on that, I don't necessarily blame people for that, because everything about these conversations is about perspective and it's about context. Because realistically, you could make a very compelling argument to someone that Tim Duncan is a better all-time player, greater all-time player. That's another thing, is what do you even qualify? Greatest, best, most talented, whatever the case may be. You can make a legitimate argument to someone, that Tim Duncan had a greater all-time career than Kobe Bryant, right? And that argument could be fully sound, and the points you're making are fully supporting what you're saying for and against. But that doesn't make it true. And then the other person can say this, can do the same thing, and they can come back, well, this is what happened, and these are the scenarios of this and this and this. And it's all about the context, and it's all about how you're presenting it and how the other person is perceiving it. And at that level, that's where my frustration comes in, because there's nothing concrete about it. There's nothing, really substantial and objective about it. It's all subjective and it's all contextual, because we're not comparing within the same variables. It's different if, you're comparing, let's just say we're talking about this current season. You're saying, well, you know what? I think the Jazz are a bigger threat in the West right now than the Nuggets for these reasons. You might say, well, that's subjective too. That's true, but it's within the same variables. It's within the same season. They're all, for the most part, playing the same teams, and there's minor different things that are different about how one team has more injury issues, or there's chemistry issues, or whatever. Or this season, some guys just aren't playing for whatever reason. That affects the record. All that stuff. But the problem with these all-time debates is you're dealing with a completely different set of circumstances. You're dealing with some guy that played in the 90s and some guy that played in 2010s, in the 2010s, and you're comparing those two players in an era in which things are completely different. So what I would advocate for is a way to really try and evaluate, for example, players across different eras, or teams across different eras, is compare them within their own era, right? So let's just say, for example, you want to have a conversation about LeBron versus Michael Jordan, right? The issue with that conversation is not the statistics, it's not the finals record, it's not, their talent level as a basketball player. The things that should be compared there that are almost never compared, in my opinion, are what they did within their own era, because you can't possibly account for the difference between the medical technology and the financial, application to working on his body that LeBron has had, everything we now know about athletics, in addition to just, the difference in the way that they live their lives. There's no way you can account for those two things as it relates to their greatness as players across different eras. It's entirely different. There's no way to account for that in a way that actually makes sense in an argument. So what you should be doing is saying, you know what? Let's not compare MJ to LeBron. Let's compare MJ to every other player in his era that were working with basically the same set of circumstances as MJ was. And how much greater was he than everybody else that he was playing against in that era, right? And then do the same thing with LeBron. How much greater in 2014 was LeBron than every other player in the league, right? Because presumably they were the best players in the league during a certain time stretch, and that's why we're comparing them as the two greatest of all time, right? And that's how you can get to an argument of, okay, maybe LeBron is in this conversation, maybe MJ is in this conversation, maybe Kareem is in this conversation, maybe Bill Russell is in this conversation, because objectively, if you really want to say, well, who's the greatest basketball player of all time, or who's the greatest big of all time, right? You can't compare Shaq to Bill Russell. You just can't. There's no comparison athletically. And Bill Russell was a great player, but Shaq would put him in a blender. He just would, because basketball is so different. Shaq is such an incredible athlete. Not that Bill Russell wasn't, but basketball it's a completely different sport now than it was then. And we have, a completely different set of, rules and a completely different set of players that Shaq is playing against compared to against who Bill Russell is playing against. So what I would advocate for, and the biggest issue that I have with these greatest of all time debates, is how people are comparing these players. Because all the time, I see it on Twitter, I see it on Instagram, I see it in live streams, is people bring up the two little stat bars, right? Like they have, here's MJ, he has this many titles, this is his scoring average, blah, 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 blah. And then here's LeBron, this is his finals record, here's his scoring average, here's his accolades, things like that. Okay, those are all great, but they don't directly relate to each other. Compare things that directly relate and are within the same circumstances, right? So compare LeBron to the rest of the players in his era, compare MJ to the rest of the players in his era. Same thing with Wilt, same thing with Bill Russell, same thing with Kareem, same thing with Shaq, same thing with Tim Duncan, right? And if you want to compare two players that played in the same time span, which is why the Duncan Kobe thing matches up, then cool, that's fine. But if you're comparing greatest of all time, rankings, whatever the case may be, I personally think the best way to do it is to compare them within their own era, because it is impossible, literally impossible from an objective standpoint. If you just want to have a conversation, you just want to, have a subjective, oh, I think this guy's better because I saw it and because this is, he was just so much better than this guy, that's fine. But if you want to have like an actual conversation, an actual debate about who's better and have it make sense, compare the players within eras. Compare the players in a way that is within the same set of circumstances, within the same context, and then see what conclusion you come to. That's what I would personally advocate for. If you guys have a better solution, obviously let me know down in the comment section below. But that is one of the reasons that I don't really get involved in these greatest of all time conversations and these rankings conversations. One, because people get really heated about them. And, if, for example, I came out with a ranking video tomorrow, right? And Russell Westbrook was 10 spots lower than someone thinks that he should be, I would get so much hate for that, even if it's the correct thing. Like, people take them so seriously that it's just like, it's almost not even worth it to have the conversation. But if you're going to, and if that's your thing, this is what I would advocate for. You don't have to listen to me, but I'm interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below in terms of if you think that's the correct way to evaluate players, and if not, how would you personally do it when you're talking about these all-time ranking things? So that's going to be the end of today's video. I know it was a little bit different one, but I just wanted to bring a bit of a different perspective to something that I see literally all the time on my social medias.